Hello, and okay, we're going to start in about 2 minutes or less. Okay, welcome everybody who's watching. Welcome to the third episode of ACK and Friends, and where we bring to you the best of Indian kids literature. Amar Chitra Katha has been telling stories to children for about 53 years now. And India has had a lot of great literature to offer, and a big part of that other is the literature that has been written solely for children. And today there are a lot of wonderful authors who are writing joyful and important stories, and we hope to give you a little sneak peek into the world of Indian kids literature. And today's guest, I'm very excited to welcome today's guest, Shabnam Minwalla. So Shabnam Minwalla has worked as a journalist in Times of India and writes food columns, book reviews, and features for Business Line, Times of India, and DNA. Her first book, that is this, The Six Spellmakers of Dorabji Street, was critically acclaimed and won a lot of appreciation. Some of her other books include The Haunting of Model High School, The Shy Supergirl, Lucky Girl, What Maya Saw, what we'll be talking about today, and Nimmi's Spectabulous School Days. So please join me in welcoming Shabnam Minwalla.
Hi.
Hello,
Lovely
hello.
to be here.
Welcome.
Thank
Welcome,
you.
Shabnam. All right. So we'll begin with, like I mentioned, you started out writing as a journalist. So how much of your journalism seeps into your writing when you're writing for kids?
Okay, so the relationship between my journalism and my fiction is not a very straightforward one. When I was 10 years old, I decided that I wanted to be a writer. Now, in my head, writer meant writing stories, writing books. But when you grow up and finish college, it doesn't seem like a very practical thing to jump into writing a book. You want a job and you want a designation and a desk and a chair. So I became a journalist. And actually, I adored it. And I spent 10 really happy years interviewing supermodels, covering fires, covering droughts, covering clean village contests across the country. It was great fun. And then I had three little daughters who came fat, one on top of the other. And like I always tell the children at the sessions I conduct, I got really bored because my life seemed to have squished into just feeding mashed potato and mashed khichdi to babies. And I was getting really pain. So one day I decided, what do I really love to do? And it struck me that more than eating cake and more than traveling and more than eating ice cream and more than growing plants and even more than shopping for saris, what I really love to do is to read books and to write. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to take a crack at writing a book. But everything I wrote for the next 3 years sounded like one long news report. It was dreadful. It really sounded like you'd open Times of India and we're just carrying on and on and on reading one story. So it took me, I think, about 2 or 3 years to detoxify and to understand that while both journalism and fiction is writing, journalism is conveying facts and it is writing by a certain kind of formula. There are rules and you have to obey those rules. I mean, that is essential. Fiction, you have to break the rules. To do really nice fiction, it's all about moving away from what everybody can see and everybody can observe and doing something a little beyond that sometimes. And that's the kind of fiction I enjoy. So once detox, yes. After that, of course, all the observations and links of my career, all the kinds of people I met. And as a journalist, you meet divine oddballs. There was this man who used to come to our office every day and say, sleep is a conspiracy. You don't need to sleep. And he wanted me to write an article about how human beings didn't need to sleep. So those were the kind of people in my life involved. So obviously, I had a huge and colorful cast of characters to bring into my books.
Yeah. So how did children's writing happen? So you made the transition between journalism and to writing fiction, but why? How come children's writing in particular? We are very thankful that you chose children's writing, but how did that come about?
Okay, so I really didn't want to write for children. I had enough children in my life. I spent my life reading Winnie the Pooh and Beatrix Potter and Enid Blyton and Rainbow Magic and God knows what to my own three big kids. And I spent my life, of course, putting them to bed and waking them up and getting them dressed. So the last thing I wanted to do was deal with kids. My plan was to write a series of great murder mysteries with a proper Bombay detective. You know, somebody who would go from Mohammed Ali Road to Dombivli in the local train, on BST buses, do daring stuff and crack cases. Okay, that was the plan. When I actually sat down to write, I think the first sentence that I wrote, so the story of how I started this book is a bizarre one. My older daughter Alia is very into music and into dancing. So she did ballet. And she went to this very crotchety Parsi teacher in South Mumbai. I won't name names, poor lady, but she was terrified. So all these kids would go in their pink tutus for ballet, and then every 3 months the mothers were called for a session. And it wasn't like, oh, watch your daughters dance. It was a session about what your daughters are doing wrong. Your daughter was doing chewing gum. Your daughter said she wanted to go to the toilet. Your daughter said she was 30 seconds late because of traffic. She was one of those. One day we all went for one of our sessions and she said, your daughters are not tying their hair properly. Their ballet buns are not good. And then her finger kind of roamed around the class of, 60, 80 young little girls. They were all about 5 and 6. And she said, Alia, come here. And my daughter stood up looking terrified. And she had put a stool right in the middle of the room. And there's 60 kids and 60 mothers all like, and then she made Alia sit. And she said, this is not a good ballet bun. And then pin by pin, she started taking out the pins. And Alia had really long hair. So there were about 18 pins in that bun. And for 10 minutes, this went on. And all the mummies were looking at me and thinking, bad mummy. And all the children were looking at me and thinking, thank God it's not us. And then finally, she picked up Alia's ponytail like that. And she said, the problem with this bun is the rubber band. And I was so upset and so humiliated. And I thought, you cow, you witch, you monster, I will show you. Then I thought, how will I show her? I'm not the kind who will go and bomb her apartment. I will put you in a book. And so that is what I did. And she is a character in my book, a character who does not run a ballet class because I didn't want to be sued to death, but a character who runs a speech and drama class. And in my book, her name is Mrs. Braganza. And she cues up children and makes them go, wah, 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 wah. And once it came into my head, I decided, okay, this has to be a fight between some lovely children and two not so lovely old ladies. And then I had to think of a point of conflict. And then, quite miraculously, into my head popped 2 trees that I had climbed on along with my friends when I was a little girl, which later, years later, got chopped down very tragically. They were bimli trees with the most beautiful, yummy green khatta bimlis, and we used to eat them and fall sick all the time, but they were our darlings anyway. And I thought, let the fight be about the trees. And I was very triumphant because I thought, okay, in real life, we couldn't save the trees, but perhaps in my book, I can.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why actually this brings me to a question that I had for Spellmakers of Dorabji Street was that like I didn't want to give away too much of the book because I think everybody should read this book, but how optimistic are you about the future? And do you think that it's the kids who will make us listen finally, because that's what comes out?
Well, when I look at my daughter's Instagram feed and stuff like that, I do see that children are engaging in a way that adults are not. So even when it comes to protests and marches and all, there is a lot more engagement in the younger generation. This in this book, of course, I think the push to save the trees is emotional as much as idealistic.
Yeah.
It's as much we want to save our friends as we want to save the world.
Yeah.
And for me, I do feel that emotion plays a very big role in any kind of
Yeah.
changing the world business. Yes, I do hope the future generation will, and I think the kind of literature, the kind of books they're reading, for example, books like The Hate You Give. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about very similar to what's happening in the US about a young girl who is in a car with a boy. They're both black, and a police officer shoots the boy. And
Hmm.
her first decision is to stay away from conflict and
Hmm.
to just hide. Her second decision is to talk about it. And it leads to huge riots across the city. But it's a fabulous book. And I really feel that, I'm very inspired to write similar things for India, because I
Hmm.
feel that this silent feeling that things are not good in a child
Yeah.
can become an articulated emotion
Yeah.
with the help of
Absolutely.
literature and with the help of adults' intervention of some kind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I know that you are a very talking about Instagram and your kids being on Instagram. I know that you're very far away from social media. You haven't bitten the social media bug yet, and maybe now all this lockdown, you will maybe bite the bug. We all hope that you will, but until then, the way that you've been connecting with your readers is a lot through literature festivals and
Yes.
by going and talking to kids and doing sessions, reading sessions, and talking about your books with kids. So,
Yeah.
what are some of your fondest experiences about these festivals?
Well, I absolutely, I really enjoy LitFest. I enjoy meeting children. I really enjoy getting their feedback, because finally you are writing. Writing is a fairly lonely profession. It's
Hmm.
you and your computer, and actually you're really hoping that it will be just you and your computer, and the house will empty out after.
Yeah.
And that you have that silence and space to work. But sometimes you're working in a vacuum, and it is these kind of interactions at which you get to meet kids. So, for example, in my sessions, when I do talk about Nimi's Spectacular School Days,
Yeah.
Nimi is a character who really loves words. So, where she
Hmm.
collects words, and where there are not words enough to express what she's feeling, she will make up words. She will join two words together. For example, Spectabulous is audience. Any ideas what Spectabulous is? Which two words? It's spectacular and
And
fabulous.
fabulous.
And the second
Yeah.
book is fantastic. So I always ask the children in my sessions to come up with words, and there have been some absolutely fabulous words. They'll
Yeah.
join like brown and yellow and make yawn or brello. So those
Okay.
kind of things are great fun. In my sessions with Strange Haunting, I ask them to make up a ghost of their own, any kind
Okay.
of, and we have come up with some spectacular ghosts. I mean, there was one child who came up with a haunted clock that kept showing the time wrong, so that
Huh.
everybody in the household is always doing things all around. And it actually much more clever than your standard ghost that goes boo boo, because it really
Yeah.
messes up people's lives. So
Yeah.
those are the kind of amazing things, and I think children and their creativity, it's just there are no barriers the way we have. They've
Yeah.
not yet developed. So I find
Correct.
all very exciting.
Okay, great. So your a lot of your protagonists are these, shy teenage girls, little awkward in the way they are and stuff. So how was going away from that? How are you as a kid?
I'm a
Is it
child.
drawn on, or is it drawn?
I'm a
And
child.
also, what did teenage Shabnam like reading? What were her favorite books?
Okay, so as a little girl, my favorite book was Anne of Green Gables. There was
Ah,
no
yeah.
competition. It was my
Hmm.
absolute favorite. And whenever I had a crisis of any kind, I would curl up in a corner with Anne of Green Gables, and Anne was my spirit companion or soul companion. When I grew a little older, I think my favorite writer then and now, and I think forever, will be Jane Austen. And I just absolutely, so my uncle lived in this huge rambling Colaba apartment, and he had bookcases and bookcases and bookcases in the house. So whenever I visited my granny, I was often very bored, so I would go and pull out things from the bookcase. And in these days, people would say, how inappropriate you were reading Raymond Chandler when you were 11. But it was fun. And Raymond Chandler at 11 is one thing, at 22 is another. And now, as an almost, like an old middle-aged person, is something else altogether and continues to be marvelous. So anyway, I discovered Jane Austen, I think, in one of those bookshelves. It was a prize my mother had won for moral science. I remember very clearly. So anyway, I picked up the book and I read Pride and Prejudice, and I think it just transformed my life in a way. So I love Jane Austen. I read all the other stuff also, Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys. I'm trying to think. Oh God, I had a horrible phase of Mills and Boon and awful books that we used to get from the corner library. We had a little library down the road, one man called Mac, and a tin trunk. And he would stick his hand in the tin trunk and bring out about 8 books and say, choose. And I can't even tell you the kind of books, like some of them were called Drumbeats of Desire and Purple Passion. And at age 11, I was reading all that. And sometimes I asked my mom, what were you doing? And she said, you were so happy. But okay, here, I still love her. Yeah. She's just amazing. And then I read a lot of those English historical things, Jean Clavey and all of those.
Okay.
But yes.
All right. So moving to our book for today, Maya. And so I want to start with, so horror plays, the theme of horror plays a lot of, like, there are a couple of your books that are around that theme. So what I wanted to start with, what do you think delights kids about horror, and why do you think it's important that, kids read this as much? Because parents tend to protect their kids from, like, nahi ye nahi padhna chahiye, the unexplained and stuff. So what do you think, what are your views on that?
I think there is something about horror, okay, that appeals. Yeah. Either it appeals or people jump back and say, I'll read all your books except your horror books. It's correct. That type of thing. I think it's a lot of fun to be scared. It's a lot of fun to be scared in a safe way. I mean, if the real things that happen to Maya really happen to you, it may not be so nice. But when you know that it's on the pages of a book, it's nice. Also, the thing about horror is it has that little bit of fantasy element. What I like about horror is that you can mix a tiny amount of fantasy and a huge amount of reality and come up with a nice blend that is neither one or the other. Yeah. And that is what I enjoy. And the horror books I write, I try to, I'm not into graveyards and skeletons chasing you in the middle of the night. I find the things that we are more likely to encounter in our everyday lives more scary. For example, I find dolls very frightening. I just find them terrifying. And to the point that, my daughters have unfortunately inherited this fear, and they will not sleep in a room with a single doll. They find it so creepy. I find swings in playgrounds quite scary. I find staircases very frightening. So I've actually written another horror book for HarperCollins, which is, I think, going to be coming out soon. It's called Saira Zariwala is Afraid. And a lot of the action takes place on the building staircase. Okay. So, I enjoy being frightened. So,
okay. So that channels well into your books. But so one of the things that when I was reading Maya was that the city of Bombay is very much a character in the book, and it plays a lot of importance in the other books, but especially in this book. And so can you talk about your relationship with the city, because it seems very dear?
I love Mumbai. I love Bombay. It's been a big part of my life. It's something. It's where I grew up. It's where I was born. I grew up. It's a very important part of me. I went to Los Angeles as a student, and I couldn't wait to come back home. I mean, I enjoyed LA, but I think my imaginary life was fully in Bombay, and at that point, I wanted to be a journalist. So I wanted to come home primarily to to write about problems and issues in India, and that's what I did. One of the things that bugged me a hell of a lot when I was growing up was that all the books I ever read were set in, small town America or
Huh.
in little English villages. And you strongly start to feel that magic and adventure only happens elsewhere. That it is
Yeah.
just not a part of the world that we live in. Our world is too grey, it's too drab, it's too dirty. And that's not exactly true. Our world has its own beauty and its own magic. So
Correct.
when I decided to write a book for children, Bombay naturally became a part of it. In what Maya saw, I wanted to do something a little beyond that. Just
Yeah.
I didn't want Bombay just to be the backdrop. I wanted to be a character. Because as my daughters became teenagers, I realized that the teenagers of today all want to be elsewhere and don't even bother to look at what they are passing. They're always
Yeah.
looking down at a screen rather than around at the bhajiwala or at the traffic light or at the buildings they pass. And Bombay, as a journalist, naturally, I traveled a lot, went around a lot, and saw a lot of really lovely details of the city. And in a way, I had a mental collection in my head. And when I decided to do a clue hunt in what Maya saw, I thought this is a good chance to use those little details. So I made a
Yeah.
list. I think I had about 200 things that I would have liked to put in. Obviously, I couldn't. My clue hunt maybe had about 12 or 15 clues. But what makes me really, really thrilled is when children who've read what Maya saw say, last Sunday I made my mum drive me to all the clues. I didn't even know we had the statue in Mumbai. I didn't even know we had that elephant there. And I
Oh.
feel, okay, achieved.
Great. So I know before you read from Maya, if you could tell us where the idea for Maya came, because there's this specific thing that keeps happening. So, yeah, how did
Yeah.
that come about?
So, okay. So there was a long time in my life when I would think, okay, the idea must come to me fully formed and gift wrapped, and I must know start to finish what is happening in my story before I deign to sit down at my computer. What Maya saw was born in a very different way. Soon after my children were born, I got a phone call from the principal of St. Xavier's College. And St. Xavier's College was where I was a student. And it was a place that I truly adored and still adore. It is a very magical corner of the city. It's an old college with gargoyles and arches and rose windows and little staircases, yes, and mysterious Godrej cupboards on in various corners, and people don't even know where the keys of those cupboards are. So it's a very exciting place. And the principal said, "We are turning 140 years old, and we would like to commission a book, and it's going to be largely a book of photography, but we would like you to do the text." So I said, okay, it seemed like a nice thing to do. I put my three kids to sleep or to drawing or whatever, and scoot off to St. Xavier's College for a couple of hours a day. And where would you now, if you want to write about the history of a college for 140 years, where do you think you would start? Well, I spoke to teachers, I spoke to the principal, but of course, I spent a huge chunk of my time in the library.
Yeah.
And the library at St. Xavier's is a huge and beautiful place with high ceilings and sunlight streaming in, and books that look like nobody's touched them for 130 out of the 140 years. Big maroon and olive green books. So I used to do a lot of research. Then one afternoon, I distinctly remember it was a really, really hot afternoon. It was dreadful. I went to the library, and there wasn't a soul there. Because every sensible person, every sensible student was sitting in the canteen and drinking juices with alluring names like Ganga, Jamna, Saraswati, and very happy with life. And I was sitting and doing my research, and I knew that the librarian was there, the assistant librarian, and I could see that he was browsing. He was like, so I thought, okay, I'm more or less alone, and fine. And then suddenly I looked up and remember it was about 3 in the afternoon. The sun was streaming in, and I saw a figure, and I thought my heart would just stop. I was so frightened. I literally went, ah! And I'm a mom of 3. I'm not supposed to have these freak fests, but I almost had a freak fest. And because I saw, or I thought I saw, a girl, and she was standing quite close to me, right in front of me, and I thought she had 2 horns coming out of her head. And it was a terrifying moment. Then she moved, and it turned out it was a trick of light. And I was so relieved that I hadn't made a scene. But for years and years, that question kept coming back to me: what if she really had horns coming out of her head? Then one day, I had just finished Strange Haunting of Model High School. I didn't have another book to write. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. Uh, and I sat at my computer and I wrote a chapter. It just thinking about the girl with the horns coming out of her head. And all I had in my head was this one moment. And may I read out the first
Yes,
chapter of
please.
what Maya
Yes.
wrote? So
Yes.
you can see the connection.
Yes.
So, okay, so I'm not going to read it out from the very beginning, but basically it's a very hot day. Maya's in the library, and I'm going to read it out from a particular point. By the third, so Maya's reading a book called A Brief History of Bombay and is getting deeply, deeply bored and pained because the sentences kind of are going on for 5-6 lines, and the man has no sense of the word brief. He's not brief at all. So, A Brief History of Bombay by D.W. Allen was worthy but eye-wateringly dull. Maya read the first page and made a few dutiful notes on her yellow pad. Then she turned to the second page and her pen slowed down. Irreverent thoughts invaded her head, mostly directed against the loquacious Mr. Allen and his misleading use of the word brief. By the third page, Maya's eyes had started to glaze. By the fifth page, she had given up on Allen and was yawning and looking around at the handsome library, which was when she felt the first twinge of unease, the tiniest prick of fear. Unlike the rest of the radiant room, the deep end of the library was an untidy clutter of shelves, cupboards, and boxes, a dumping ground for ancient encyclopedias, old magazines, college newsletters, cartons of long donated books. It was in that dusty greyness that something shifted. Startled, Maya stared into the murk. She thought she was alone. But deep in the twilight corner was a crouching figure. Maya stumbled to her feet when, to her absolute relief and mortification, she saw that the figure was just a girl, hunched over a bookshelf, an ordinary girl hunting for an ordinary book. Maya flushed. How shameful if she had hurried out of the library, babbling about wild beasts. How totally uncool. Firmly, she turned back to her book and her pens and her pad, and willed her heart to stop to behave itself. But it refused to do so. Instead, some instinct made her glance again at the silhouette. That was when she saw them. For an uncomprehending moment, Maya just sat there, horror jolting through her like an electric shock. Not real, Maya gibbered to herself, imagining trick of life, nonsense, nonsense. In that confused moment, the girl stood up and stepped into the light. And Maya gagged. The girl had horns on her head, twisted, grey things thrust out of purplish lumps on her forehead, bony, hideous, and real. Maya's stomach lurched. She wanted to run, but was incapable of movement. She wanted to scream, but could barely whimper. So she remained marooned in the middle of the large room, pen poised and pad and heart banging furiously. The creature with the horns strode through the library. She didn't pay Maya any attention, but as she hurried past with long, graceful steps, Maya's pen slipped from numb fingers and clattered to the floor.
No.
Now, Maya is absolutely frozen. This girl is walking past, and as the pen clatters onto the floor in that empty room, it makes a bit of a tak sound. And the girl turns and she looks. And she looks at Maya and looks rather puzzled. Then she stares at Maya and looks even more puzzled. And then she lifts her hand and rubs her forehead. And the horns sort of shimmer and disappear. And then she keeps staring at Maya with very blank eyes and walks out of the room. I'm wondering, what would you do in this situation? How would you behave? Tell me. I'm waiting to hear what any of you would do.
Yeah,
Any responses?
I will tell you. So, and everybody who's watching, if you were in place of Maya, what would you have done? You guys,
What
would
would
you
you
have
do?
done?
Would you scream? Would you shout? Would you laugh? Would you sort of run out of the college and say, I'll never come back here? What would you do? Any responses? Okay, I will tell you what Maya did. Maya,
Everyone is thinking.
is there a response?
No, no. We just so Anupama Rajesh says that I will scream my guts out. Sanjya says she will follow the girl. Very brave.
Lovely. Okay, okay.
Yeah, so she will
I will
follow
tell
the
you what Maya did. Maya was about to freak, but of course she managed to bite back her scream, and she kind of held her panic in, and she grabbed all her pad and a pen and shoved it into her bag and quickly marched out of the house, out of the library, back into the corridor, and thought, I hate this place, I hate this place, I am never going to come back. But let's backtrack just a little and talk about Maya. Who is Maya? Do you think she is some brave superhero kind of monster hunter? Do you think she's that kind of girl? No. Actually, Maya was a very ordinary girl, a bit of a scary boo, if anything. She was the kind of girl who was afraid of the dark and afraid of spiders and afraid of rats and afraid of twisty corridors and staircases with cobwebs hanging down. She was afraid of heights and she was afraid of depths. So what the hell was she doing in a library with a girl with horns? Maya was a schoolgirl. She wasn't even a college girl. But she was set to have a very restful summer holiday. She was the kind of girl who really, she was a very bright girl, very, very clever, and she was always spending her entire life doing chemistry Olympiads and maths Olympiads and taking part in creative writing competitions. But this year she had said, this summer holiday, I am going to be at home. I am not going to do anything else. And her mother, who was a bit of a Maya, you must do something. You must not waste your time kind of person. For once, she had to agree. And she said, okay, 9th standard was very bad. 10th standard will be worse. You rest. So Maya was all set to go looking for nail polish and to figure out what hairstyle suited her and to learn how to make marshmallow cookies when a letter landed up in the house. And the letter was from a man named Professor Kekoba. And Professor Kekobath had written that St. Paul's College, which was a very prestigious college in Bombay, was having a summer school. Now, this summer school was largely for college children. You could only get in if you were really good at what you were doing and if you did very well in their interview. But he had read an essay on Mumbai's history that Maya had written, and he had been so impressed by it that he was inviting Maya to the summer school. Now, if you had been in Maya's place, what would you have said? Would you have wanted to go and do a summer school in an unfamiliar college with a bunch of unfamiliar college kids? Would you? Would you? What would you?
Would you guys go to the college and start a summer job?
Okay.
All right.
Maya didn't want to go. She said, no, I am not going to go.
Somebody else says, yes, absolutely, yes.
Anupama Rajesh, you are a toughie. And Kritika would say, yes, okay. Maya wanted to be at home. Okay, so Sanjia Mayekar says, not at all. Just like Maya. She told her mom, I don't want to go. But was her mom the kind to take no for an answer? Okay, Anupama. Her mom said, Maya, this is very prestigious. My friend Veena Mirpuri's son got rejected last year. She will be so jealous to know you were invited. You have to go. And could Maya say no? No. And 3 days later, Maya and her yellow pad And her blue pen and her cholla and a box of chicken sandwiches were standing outside the gates of St. Paul College. And that was what Maya was going to do for the next 3 weeks of her life. So poor Maya went into the college, very nervous, walked through the arch, went into a dark little room, asked the chokidar, Abhi kahan jane ka? Where is room 113? And said, go like this, go like that, turn left, सीधा जाओ और फिर एकदम ऊपर सीढ़ी से जाओ और मिल जाओ. So Maya walked through the college, saw the beautiful courtyard, saw the gargoyles, heard a basketball banging, and then she looked and she saw that one of the professors' names was Hermione Salazar. And Maya was a bit of a Harry Potter fan, so she got a little happy and thought, okay, maybe it won't be so bad. She landed up in her classroom, and it was a nice AC room full of people chattering about fashion and about some basketball match and about some cricket and football. And she was very happy. She crept in because Maya was very shy, and she went and sat in one corner and decided, I will be invisible and I will pretend I am not here and I will hope everybody will ignore me. And she was fine. Now you can do that through class. But what happens when the bell rings for lunch? Can you hang around your classroom being invisible? No. Now everybody goes off to the canteen and Maya is too shy and terrified to go to the canteen. She doesn't know a soul in this place. So by herself, she goes to the courtyard and she sits in the quadrangle and she looks at the gargoyles and she looks at the chapel. And then what to do? She's eaten her chicken sandwiches. They had too much butter. She's feeling a little yucky. So she starts walking around. And that is when her feet take her past a room with high ceilings and sunlight streaming in and old books that look like nobody has read them for many decades. And Maya thinks, a library. I love libraries. And she enters the library. And you all know what happens when she is in the library. And so she comes screaming, or not screaming, but panicking out and thinks, I want to go home and I'm going to tell my mother I will never again come to this college. But by the end of the day, she's calmed down. She thinks, okay, if this college has some weird girls with horns on their head, what is it to do with me? And by the time she goes home, her mother has boasted to 77 people about how brilliant Maya is and how she's been invited to the summer school. So Maya decides, okay, I'll give this college another shot. For the next few days, she continues to go. She makes a bunch of friends. A girl named Lola who wears very uncomfortable footwear and is constantly hurting her ankle. She takes a great dislike to a girl named Veda, who is one of those girls who, whenever a teacher asks a question, will put up 3 hands. Miss, miss. And if anybody has an opinion different from hers, will touch and look disapproving. But I'm going to tell you a little bit of a secret. One of the big reasons why Maya keeps going back is that in this class, there is a boy named Sana. He's from Sri Lanka and he has very sad eyes. And every time Maya looks at him, her heart does this teeny bit of a cartwheel or a somersault. And maybe it is to keep looking at him and to have that cartwheel or somersault in her tummy that Maya continues to go back. Life seems to be settling down when one day Professor Kekobad is doing a class. He's showing a whole lot of pictures of old Bombay on the screen, and he's asking the students to try and connect them with modern Bombay. And everyone is looking at the screen. Now, in that class is a boy named Owais who's very good looking and very dashing and very supermodelly. And Owais is one of those who sleeps late and trundles in late. So the door opens, nobody turns because they're so busy looking at the photographs, but Professor Kekobad is a crusty old man who says, thank you always for bothering to join us. And the whole class turns back and then looks at Owais, and the girls giggle because Owais is so good looking. And then everybody turns back to their work. Everybody except Maya. Maya looks at him and she goes, and Lola is sitting next to her. And she said, Maya, what happened? And Maya says, Owais says, I. And Lola says, yeah, his eye. What about it? And that is when Maya realizes that whatever she is seeing is something that only she sees. Because when she looks at Oways, she sees something coming out of his eye. Blood, a thin stream of blood, enough blood to come all the way down to his collar and puddle over there. It is a terrifying sight, but nobody else can see it. And Maya completely freaked. She loses it. She wants to throw up. She grabs all her stuff, shoves it into her bag, mumbles about being sick, and runs out of the room. And she gets into a taxi, and the poor Chachaji is really terrified to have this sobbing girl sitting and howling in his taxi. She goes home, she rings the doorbell. She tells her mom, I am never going back there. And mom says, oh, don't worry, you have a sunstroke. I will take you to the doctor. But of course, Maya never makes it to Dr. Paresh Desai because at 4 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rings. And who do you think has rung the doorbell and come to visit Maya? Any guesses?
Any guesses before we start taking some questions from the audience? You just, if you guys can guess who would have come ringing on the doorbell, and then we'll quickly start taking some questions, because who could it be? I know who it is, so I'm not guessing.
Who do you think it is? Who do you think it is?
Always, many people. Yeah.
Always? Not always.
The girl with the horns. The girl with the horns.
The girl with the horns, but thank God, don't you think? Somebody else. Okay, I will tell you because we are short of time. It's Professor Kekobar. And he comes, and that is how Maya realizes that there is a mystery in the college and that she is going to play an instrumental part in solving it and in finding the baddies who are called shadows, creatures who live somewhere between the world of life and death.
Yeah, so this is something that you guys will, must read what Maya saw to see what Maya saw. All right, you guys, if you have some questions, we already had some questions coming in. So, how do you find Anupama Rajesh says, how do you find time to write with 3 kids?
Okay. So in the world before lockdown, it was easy. At 8:57, my daughters would leave the house to catch their bus. And I was so grateful to the school bus because that would not wait for them. So they had to go. And then I have to tell you a secret. I wouldn't shower. I wouldn't do my grocery shopping. I wouldn't call the vegetable man. Just sit in front of the computer and write till 12 o'clock. And wouldn't look at my phone. All I did was write. And then around 12:30, I surface every day and then go for my shower and then sort of figure out how the life will proceed. But yes, in lockdown, things are tougher. I now write at night till about 2:30 in the morning. And my writing's a bit slower, but it's happening. It's happening.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Sanjaya says that she loves the horror genre too. And how do you decide what's too scary for kids?
You know, for a long time, I had this very rosy image about children and what is too scary and too not scary for them. But I'm sorry, I have figured that children are able to handle much more scary stuff than I am. When I look at the other children's literature around, anything, in children, young adult literature, I look at stuff like Twilight or even series like Bottomless Trout. I'm appalled by the level of graphic and scary stuff that's there. Everybody seems to take it very for granted. But no, I'm careful. I don't like to kill too many characters. I'm very careful about that. And in my new horror book, one person does die, and I felt really awful about it, especially because it was quite a sweet person. And so I'm careful. I don't want to make things too graphic and too nasty. But I like, you must be properly scared. You must get goosebumps.
Absolutely. All right. Do we have Rituparna says, how do you select names for your characters?
I love selecting names for my characters, and I spend a lot of time doing that. Okay. So I'm really thrilled you asked me this question. So in What Maya Saw, I chose the name Maya because Maya means illusion. And Maya is able to see beyond illusions. My Maya can see beyond illusions to a reality that other people cannot see. Always, I chose the name because always means wolf. So it gives that slightly unpleasant feeling. I'm trying to think the other names in the book. Okay. Um, uh, Lola's real name is Lalitanjali, Light of
Okay.
Knowledge. Veda's real name is Veda Knowledge. So they're all connected in some ways with an essential quality in them. My
Hmm.
shadows. I'm not going to tell you their names because I don't want you to jump into the book and know who the baddies are
Yeah,
right
yeah,
away.
absolutely.
But my shadows all have names that have slightly unpleasant connotations. So
Oh,
yes,
wow.
I choose my names carefully.
Oh,
In my Mimi series. Oh, sorry,
huh. Okay,
my
yeah.
Mimi. Okay, carry on. Please.
Sorry, there are a bunch of questions coming in. So,
Oh,
what's your favorite place in Mumbai? Parinita asks, what's your favorite place in Mumbai and which would make a great character in a children's book? If you had
hi
to turn up.
Paramita, how lovely to see you. Well, I think my favorite place in Mumbai, St. Xavier's College, for sure. And I love Kolaba because that is where I've grown up. And in fact, I'm doing a non-fiction book, which is for both for adults and for children, on the story of Kolaba, the history of Kolaba. And
Okay.
because I now know so much about Kolaba, it is now the setting of a young adult book that I'm doing.
Okay.
And this young adult book sort of crosses time. So there's one romance that is happening in the 1930s, which is the time my grandmother came to Bombay from Penang with her sisters. And it is actually a little family romance that we discovered in a diary. So that
Okay.
plays a role. And then there is, of course, a contemporary character. And a lot of it is, Yacht Club, Gateway of India, Apollo
Okay.
Bandar, the gullies of Colaba, which are I think, the blood that runs in my veins. So
All right. Great. Shall we get one of the okay. So why is it so that horror isn't a popular why do you think it's not popular genre with kids authors, children's authors?
is it not popular? I don't know. I read a lot of horror, so I think okay. So, so I think there is a sense that maybe children, there is this view that children don't should not be frightened. But honestly,
Huh.
when you read any fairy story, they are
Yeah,
much
yeah.
grimmer.
There is
The
always
original
correct.
version of Cinderella
Absolutely.
involves
Yeah.
the poor stepmother's feet being cut off. I mean, I
Yeah.
honestly, my horror is not so horrible. My horror is just a
Correct.
little creepy with bad, unpleasant feelings on staircases and
Yeah.
slightly horrid dolls lurking around. But
Correct.
and I really
Great.
hope you'll read what Maya saw. You'll realize that
Huh.
there is one character in what Maya saw that was very unpleasant, and that character I wove in much later because of a personal experience, but I can't tell you because it'll give that too much away, which is very
Yeah.
sad. Maybe after you read the book, try and guess
Yeah.
which that character is.
We
Okay.
shall do that. Okay, so Aparna asks, what fictional universe would you like to disappear into?
Oh God. Now I would be very traumatized. Can I choose about 27 fictional universes?
No,
Then
no, you
definitely
must. Huh.
one. One is very stingy.
Okay, five.
Okay, Pemberley, Darcy and
Okay,
Elizabeth Bennet. Okay,
great.
Anne of Green Gables, and Prince Edward's
Yeah,
Island.
won't
Um,
be on.
uh, I'd quite like to be a part of Star Wars as well, though grim
Yes.
things happen.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get the appeal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Wouldn't you like to visit that one?
Yeah.
How could I forget Enchanted Woods and Magic Faraway Tree in Blighton?
Yes.
No, that's my number one. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm reversing my order. Okay, I can think of another 27 at least on the top of my mind, but we'll do with five.
Okay.
But in
Great.
Blighton,
Do
number one.
we have time for a couple of more? Okay. What is your second most preferred genre after horror?
Okay, I like funny books. I like writing funny books, but funny books are scary. Funny books
Hmm.
are scarier than scary books because it's easier to scare people than to make people laugh.
Yeah.
And I'm never sure whether my funny books will click. One way to tell is, of course, if I'm giggling when writing. And my third Nimi book, which is called Where Are You, Nimi, Nimi, Nimi? Nimi's Bazooka Birthday. I was writing one scene on a flight, and I realized I was giggling, and I realized about five people had turned and they were gaping at me like that. They were looking terrified. You don't want to be stuck with a laughing mad woman on a flight.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I know this scene will probably work. And it has worked. So yes, I
Okay.
like funny books and I like adventure and I love mystery. So at the
Okay.
moment, I'm working on a lockdown mystery with two
Huh.
sealed buildings, one across the other, where this girl is sitting in one and looking at the into the other building, and a murder takes place there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm very
All
excited.
right.
I hope it
So,
works.
okay. We have time for one last question. And Anupama says, what do you how do you ease children into horror as a genre, and any book suggestions?
Any book
Something.
suggestions for horror? Um, I'd have to think about. Well, there's a girl with all the gifts. I think that name is. Then of course, there are the we think Indian horror or any horror.
Any horror,
Yeah,
anything
there
you can
are
think
very
of.
nice compendiums of horror short stories, which is a great way to ease children into.
Yeah, short
HarperCollins
stories.
did one, which is like a flip book. So I think it's half funny, half horror. Then
Okay.
I've written for a book on ghost stories also, which had some really nice and chilling and creepy stories. Um, and then I'm trying to think of a nice young adult horror book, which would be Doll Bones. That is very scary. It's very unpleasantly scary, but it is very scary. I didn't
All
sleep for 2 nights, and my kids didn't sleep for one. So,
Great. Thank you so much, Shabnam. I wish we had more time and we could keep chatting because we have a whole lot of questions we would like to
oh,
ask you. But
love
thank you
that.
so much for joining us. We've had an absolutely wonderful time. And thank you, everybody else, also who joined in and watched.
Yes,
And please, yeah, thank you so much.
big
And
thank you, everyone. Please read anything. Happy books,
yes,
sad books, Indian books, foreign books, but
yes.
read. Okay. All
Yes,
right.
and with that, that's a great place to end. Please join us
Thank you,
next week
Sandra.
again for. Please join us next week again with at the same time at 5 o'clock on Fridays. We have a brand new author with us. So thank you so much. All right.
Bye. Bye.
All right. I quickly want to just tell everybody who's watching that we have a new comic out from Amar Chitra Katha on the Amar Chitra Katha app. It is going to release in 5 parts. And so the first part is out. It is from stories from the Shiva Puran. It's called Mahadeva. So please go and check it out on the app. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, Shabnam. Thank you again. See you.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.